Hi there, and welcome to another Haltech What's So Special About. And today, we've got the mighty Honda K24 here. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of history about Honda itself. Believe it or not, Honda's founder, Soichiro Honda, actually started out making piston rings for Toyota. He then moved to motorcycles in the late 1940s, which were actually assembled in a wooden shack. The bikes were followed by small pickup trucks in the early 1960s, and then the first ever Honda production car was the S500 Sports Coupe. That was in 1963. Why a sports car? Well, it turns out that old Honda-san was mad about motorsport. In 1954, he decided Honda motorcycles would race at the Isle of Man TT. It took him 5 years to develop the motorcycles, and on debut in 1956, Honda won the Manufacturers' Team Award. In 1961, with motorcycle legend Mike Hallwood on board, they won 2 of the TT races. Not only that, they also won the 250cc and the 125cc titles in the World Motorcycle Grand Prix season. With that success under their belt, in 1962, Honda decided to aim for Formula One. A few more years of development, and Honda was on the podium, with a win at the 1956 Mexican Grand Prix. Honda's been racing in Formula One and supplying engines on and off throughout the years, right through to the present day. The highlight of which is probably Honda's partnership with McLaren in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and the relationship with the late, great Ayrton Senna, who was instrumental in the development of the original Honda NSX, possibly one of my favourite sports cars of all times. It's such a unique and beautiful car. Now, we could talk for days about Honda's involvement in the Japanese Super GT series, the British Touring Car Championship, the World Touring Car Championship, IndyCar or Le Mans, and more motorcycle racing than you can poke a Kickstarter at. But what it all boils down to is that Honda has done a huge amount of motorsport, and that motorsport experience has led to Honda's power plants not only being very efficient, but also incredibly well engineered and extremely reliable. Which brings us to this power plant, the Honda K-Series. For years, the K-Series has been the favourite swap of front-wheel drive Hondas. Fans of golden era 90s Hondas have been binning their D, F, even B series engines in favour of the K series since they hit the scene in the early 2000s. There are now entire companies devoted to manufacturing parts for K swaps into these older Hondas and a whole bunch of other model cars. The Honda K series was first offered in 2001 in the hot hatch Type R trims of the Civic and Integra, and is still today offered in DI form of several Honda and Acura models. Nearly a 20-year lifespan means that there's plenty of variants of this engine to choose from, and it's now done 20 years of engine development from the early 2000s right up to today. The most popular models for swaps and performance applications are the early K20 engines from the 2001-ish to 2006 EP3 Civic and DC5 Integra, and the K24 engines from the 2002-ish to 2008-ish Honda Accord and Acura TSX. These are my personal favourite. Often pushed as the best performing package is a hybrid combination of both, with the high-flowing K20 head and the larger displacement K24 bottom end. In recent years, rear-wheel drive K-swap markets absolutely exploded, with several aftermarket manufacturers producing rear-wheel drive gearbox adapters, conversion parts, and even full kits to swap the K-Series into Honda S2000, Mazda MX-5, Mazda RX-7, and even the Nissan S and some R chassis. With pieces and parts from these manufacturers and a little fabrication knowledge, it is possible to put Honda's incredible 4-cylinder into virtually any chassis that you prefer. Within this segment, the K24 from the 2009 to 2014 Accord TSX is also extremely popular due to its massive supply, its low cost, and advantageous exhaust packaging, with the exhaust manifold runners being cast right into the cylinder head. The Honda K-Series engine has enjoyed continued success in motorsports, from drag racing to time attack, wheel-to-wheel circuit racing, and even European autocross. When used in drag racing, the K-Series does have a torque advantage over the older Honda designs, and the rules are actually set up in a way that allow advantages to the older B and H-Series engines to even the playing field a little bit. The fastest all-motor K-Series races are all in the 8s now in the quarter mile, and the turbo cars are pushing deep into the 7s. These cars are getting so fast that racers are now employing all-wheel drive conversions to try and go even faster. Time attack racers like James Horton and Rob Newen rely on high horsepower K-Series to set records on tracks all across the world. A detuned K-Series is the winning formula in power-to-weight racing series like GridLive's Touring Cup, where over half of the top contenders are K-Series powered. In European autocross, legendary racers like Marcus Thomas use a 2.7 litre stroked version of the K-Series, and this thing propels his buggy to numerous wins and championships. Haltech Elite ECUs support the factory trigger patterns for all of the variants of the K20A, K24A, K20Z, and K24Z. Additionally, all forms of v-tec are supported, including single or dual cam control and the electronic lift control. Your ECU choice depends upon the features of your specific engine. Engines with variable intake cam and without drive-by-wire in non-motorsport applications might opt for something like our Elite 1000, but most applications benefit from the added 4D or four-dimensional tuning flexibility of the Elite 1500. Applications with drive-by-wire or dual variable cam control will require the Elite 1500 series ECU. For early model K20 and K24 engines with harnesses that suit either Honda EP3 Civic or DC5 Integra or RSX, Haltech offers Pro plug-in ECUs and plug-and-play adapter harness that'll suit our system here, like the Elite 1500. So that's a style of ECU that typically would be getting used on basically all of the K-Series. We make this adapter harness that goes into sort of EP3 or DC5 factory wiring harness. Then all we have is our simple little adapter harness here that just plugs straight in. We snap that in there, that in there, that in there. We plug our Haltech ECU into the other end. 1, 2. Factory harness plugs into here and we're ready to tune. With few common flaws, a standard compression check is just about all that's really needed to ensure a healthy engine's chosen for your project. If you've got the time or resources to inspect an engine before purchase, it's worth pulling off the valve cover and having a quick look at the valve train and camshafts. You can tell if the thing's been really looked after or not. What you're looking for here is like an oil sludge buildup or heavy oil varnishing. This could be evidence of a lack of routine maintenance and may result in premature camshaft or bearing wear. And let's be honest, most of these things are in family commuters that have done a couple of 100,000 miles or kilometers and are probably getting serviced. They're supposed to be every 10,000, 15,000 kilometers, and then people are pushing them out to 20, 25,000 kilometers. So just be very wary of that. On to the main event, the K-Series. At first glance, Honda's K-Series doesn't appear to be worth any high-performance merit. Just another pedestrian four-cylinder mill known for excellent fuel economy. From the factory, it's a bit boring. It doesn't have a turbo, and it's got a pretty modest rev limiter. What's not immediately evident is the platform's potential. It's a robust all-aluminium double overhead cam engine outfitted with a coil-on plug ignition system, roller rockers, a forged crankshaft, cast iron sleeves, and Honda's elegant v-tec, which includes electronic lift control and variable timing control. Simple and ingenious in design, Honda's electronic lift control allows one single camshaft to have essentially two profiles. The low profile provides excellent fuel economy in cruising situations, and a more aggressive high cam profile allows greater airflow and top-end performance. The sound of the crossover from low to high cam is something Honda's absolutely famous for. You get that honk when it comes onto the second camshaft. New for the Honda 4-cylinder in 2001, the K-Series had variable timing control via ECU-controlled hydraulically adjustable cam gears. This complement of technologies that allowed both economy and performance was dubbed v-tec as the next generation of Honda's revered v-tec system. K-Series tuners have expanded the horsepower out of these engines by outfitting turbochargers, superchargers, and even nitrous. Completely stock long blocks, which is what this thing is, holds upwards of nearly 400 horsepower at the wheels. Swap out pistons and rods, and the stock crank and sleeves can handle 700 horsepower. Fully built engines can achieve impressive horsepower numbers cresting over the 4-digit mark. Well, we've spoken about this thing enough. It's time to get down and dirty. Let's strip it down and see what's inside. Just a note, I have spent the day already disassembling this thing, cleaning so much oil out of it so I don't destroy the studio here. It's been reassembled, so just keep that in mind that I've done that so that we can get through the video nice and quick and don't bore you to death. All right, well, all we're gonna do is we're gonna start at the top. We're gonna work our way down. So we'll pull the rocker cover off. We'll have a look at the valve gear inside. Then we'll just start going through and we'll get right down to the bottom. And today we might even try and pull some pistons out. Well, that's where all the efficiency is. Cylinder head, these camshafts, and what's so special about them is they've got one lobe per valve. It's got 16 valves because it's got 8 valves for the intake and it's got 8 valves for the exhaust side. Twin camshaft, the camshafts are driven by a timing chain. This thing has continuously variable intake cam control. And then we've got our v-tec lift solenoid on the side here. What's absolutely amazing about this thing, like I was saying before, is how essentially it does have 2 different cam profiles. When this solenoid on the side here allows oil pressure through, there's a whole bunch of little locking pins that we're going to get to here that allow basically a different cam profile to be activated, and you get that v-tec honk. In aspirated form, the thing on the low camshaft will say, let's make, say, about 110 kilowatts at the wheels, somewhere around there. As soon as we engage that high camshaft, the thing will make about 145 kilowatts at the wheels. So to put that in perspective, that's a huge power gain on an aspirated engine. This is pretty special, and this is a part of the Honda that I just think is absolutely incredible. So full roller rocker setup as a factory car that makes, like I said, 130 kilowatts, 140 kilowatts at the wheels, that is going to go in all types of family sedans. The engineers absolutely outdid themselves. These engines, amazing. The things that were really nice about it are the caps for the camshaft. The same single cap holds the inlet and exhaust camshaft together. So there's less components in total to hold the camshafts in, less bolts, but it holds the whole thing much more solid because it's one part that's bracing the top of the engine. Really, really nice. All right, so what we were talking about here with the 2 different cam profiles is that we've got the little driving around town cam profile here, and then we've got the big high RPM, high power cam profile here. The magic inside the Honda engine is how we use oil pressure and an electronic solenoid to be able to switch back and forward between cam profiles on the fly. So let me give this a go, trying to explain how this part works. So we actually don't have oil pressure in the engine, obviously. That's going to be a problem for me explaining how this piston shoots out, but I'll do my best to explain it. So I'm just going to pick one cylinder here to explain it on a single cylinder. So this is cylinder 1, cylinder 2, cylinder 3, cylinder 4, intake side. Intake and exhaust work in exactly the same way. What normally happens here is our camshaft is pushing on our rollers here, And normally, I'm just going to leave those two. This is what's going on. The camshaft is pushing up and down on our rollers, which are in turn pushing up and down on our two intake valves. You can see there that I can move them independent of this middle one, which not many cars have. This one's actually doing nothing when we're cruising around town. All it's doing is just chilling out. It's going up and down on the large cam profile, but it's not actuating any valves. Now watch this. I'm going to pull this little bit apart. So at the moment, you can see that everything's working independently. If I pop this one up, if we can see just on the inside here, there's this little piston that's sitting on the inside here. If we applied oil pressure to the engine and we activate the v-tec solenoid, this little piston is going to spit out in this direction. When it spits out in that direction, I'm just going to pull this piston out and see that on this rocker arm, we've got a little piston that's spring actuated here. Can you see that? So what would happen is when we apply a pressure across through this piston in turn locks this rocker arm and this rocker arm together. When the piston shoots out of this one, this piston in the middle shoots across here, in turn locking into this arm. So I'll manually do that now. That goes into there, that goes into there, that goes into there. And what we end up with is, here we go, we'll move that one. You can see now, these two are locked together. If we had oil pressure here, pushing this piston out, this third arm would also be locked together. So then these three would be working in unison. I might pop that out and this might be a better way to show it. These three would now be working together and working off the center or off the high lift part of the camshaft. Now that we're past the magic of the variable valve lift system, remembering that we also have, this is the exhaust side. Let me put the intake side here. We've also got the continuously variable cam control as well. So this is the one that can advance or retard the intake cam. I think a lot of factory cases, about 30 degrees, you can adjust these to get up to 50 degrees of intake camshaft movement. The way that works is we pulse this solenoid here, we let oil in to advance it, we pull oil out to retard it, and we hold it at a certain position in order to lock the cam in place. So if we wanted to say advance the inlet cam, for example, we would open the solenoid to, let's say, 60% of its available flow. We would monitor the cam angle until it advances to the right position. Then we would come back to what we call a lock position or a steady state position on that solenoid, where we might apply, say, 50% of its available flow, which will lock that cam in position so it can't advance or retard. If we then want to retard the camshaft, we might want to operate this valve at, say, 40% of its maximum flow. The camshaft will retard, then we'll come back to our 50% lock state and lock it at the next position. We map this cam angle against all RPM, all throttle position, or manifold pressures. So every time that you're driving your car, this continuously variable camshaft is doing exactly that. It is continuously moving around in order to make the most power across the entire rev range. So think about that in the old school style engine where you had your vernier cam gear. So you'd put the thing on the dyno, you had a bunch of Allen keys in the front of the cam gear. You'd give it a run, see what power it made. Then you would talk to your tuner and say, all right, well, it's making a lot of top end power. I can sacrifice some of that top end because I want to get more bottom end. So you would mechanically move the camshaft a few degrees, give it another run. It would lose some top end, but you'd pick up some bottom end. Then you'd talk to the tuner and decide on, okay, where do I drive the car? Which cam angle best suits me and how do I want to lock it up? So that was how we used to do it, and we used to have to make sacrifices. When it's continuously variable, just tune for the most power everywhere. All right, the next task is a pretty straightforward one. We'll just pull the 10 mils off the side here and pull the v-tec solenoid off. So this one on the side here is the one that's responsible for the oil flow to do the cam switching. The one on the front here is responsible for the oil flow to do the variable, continuously variable cam control. I'll zap this one off. I understand that this one does have problems every now and then, where if you don't change the oil enough, this thing has got some filter baskets down the bottom here, which do fill up with junk. So it might be worth just popping that off, having a bit of a look, clean it up, and then slap it back on if you've got any cam control switching problems. This is where the timing chain tensioner is. So this is a hydraulically assisted tensioner. Basically, when you put a chain on, you've got a little sort of hole in here that you put a pin into after you've pulled back that tensioner, set everything up, pull the pin, the timing chain goes tight, and away you go. So nice to have a little inspection plate there. This is the crank sensor itself. So this is a Hall effect crank sensor. So it's got a power supply, a ground supply, and a signal wire that comes out. It measures a tone wheel that's mounted on the actual crankshaft itself. Here we go. That's what the sensor looks like. So it's just got a 3-pin connector. It faces down like this, looking directly at the crankshaft. And when we get the bottom out, we'll be able to see how many teeth are on the crankshaft and the pattern that's there. The crank pulley. If you've seen any of the other videos, these ones always get me. Today, this crank pulley got me as well. One thing to note is that Honda do it a little bit of a different way, where there's a special tool that actually holds the outer of the harmonic dampener here. And then you can use a rattle gun on the inner to try and get the bolt out. We had all sorts of fun with that. So dampener off, a Woodruff key. So the Woodruff key sits in the crankshaft and then locates in the balancer to stop it spinning. The grooves on this are really interesting because it locates onto the crankshaft with the Woodruff key, but it's got a whole bunch of grooves here. There's no receiver grooves on the crankshaft. So these grooves are here simply to make it easy to get this on and off. On other brands of engines, they don't have any sort of notchings or anything like that on the inside of the balancer, making it so that you've got two metal surfaces jammed together makes it almost impossible to get balancers off sometimes. So I really appreciate that, and I think it's a really nice idea. So there we go. So that is the cam solenoid that's controlling the oil to the inlet cam gear. So basically, as this plunger moves forward and backwards, it allows oil through these filters to either fill the cam solenoid, empty the cam solenoid, or hold it a steady state. That's another one that's got a whole bunch of filter baskets across the front of it as well. So if you do get a high K wrecker engine, might be worth pulling that out and giving it a bit of a clean before you start tuning it. Timing chain comes down through to really nice, really long tensioners and guides that hold everything in place and make it so there's no rattles. Very rarely have timing chain problems in these things. Down the bottom here, where we were talking about our crank sensor before. So the crank sensor was coming in through the side here of the timing cover case, and it's looking at this tone wheel here. And that's what it looks like. So when they talk about your crank trigger or your cam trigger on your engine, how many teeth it's got, well, we can count it here. So this thing has got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and a little extra tooth sitting there. And that's what the Honda K24 trigger type is. The sensor sits like this. As the teeth go around, it counts all of the teeth. It's a really nice crank trigger for a factory engine, so beautiful. Keep in mind this engine is going for a rebuild, so most of this stuff is going to get binned, so that's why I'm being sort of pretty rough with most of it. All right, and that's about all we've got time for. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sure that you've got this far. You want to see the bottom of it? You want to see the crankshaft come out? All right, well, first thing we better do is take that cylinder head off. Nice long head bolts. I did notice that it had a set of aftermarket camshafts in it. It has got titanium retainers in the springs as well, so there must be something going on. So the inlet manifold would normally be sitting on here. This particular engine looks like it's had a little bit of porting work done on there so that the air's flowing in a little bit nicer. If we get the camera right in here, we can actually see, which is pretty cool, the tract going in, where the air's going in, the little bit in the top where the injector is actually sitting to spray the fuel in, and then the back of the inlet valve's right there. So you can see that the way that the air's going into the engine. I understand it's not fully indicative of the whole airflow modeling of the thing, but just looking at it and seeing how close and the shape of everything is really, really nice. So we can see here, 4-cylinder, it's got cast sleeves like we were talking about. It's of an almost open deck style design, so there's plenty of cooling. Let's flip it over. We'll pull the sump off and then start to get to business on the crankshaft end. So inside the sump there, the sump, very basic, no baffling, no anything at all. Just a place to hold the oil. Because this is something that when we pulled this, I was shocked to see this. This is cool. This is the oil pump assembly, this whole thing. So it's not something that's tiny that just sits in the front of the timing cover case, and it's not direct driven off the nose of the crankshaft. It's actually got its own little drive chain, its own little set of tensioners. So there's the drive gear for our oil pump chain. This is our actual crank sprocket. So it was one of these are driving the cam gears, the other one is the oil pump. So you can understand now why the sump doesn't have too much baffling in it. It's almost as if the pump assembly itself has got the baffling internal. It's a really, really nice design. I'll roll this over a little bit so we can have a look inside. I'm going to spin that. So that's as if we're spinning the pump around. It's an amazing thing, a really, really nice system. Admittedly, I probably wouldn't want anything going wrong with it, but in saying that, the engines are so affordable that if something ever did go wrong with something like this, you wouldn't get that too deep into it. You'd be onto another wrecker engine and away you go. What you'll notice here is there's no individual main caps for the crankshaft. This is another thing that I'm just envious of. I think it's a really, really nice system where the main caps, a whole bunch of bolts, and then it basically braces the bottom of the block. So this is one of the conversions, like a lot of the RB guys are now doing these sort of bottom end brace systems. Factory Honda. Come on, look at that. Wow. It's solid and yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing. So if you were going to be building one of these things, rods and pistons are probably the first thing you'd be looking at. The rods physically certainly don't look massive at all. They do handle a beating, so they've obviously got something down with the design and the shape of them, but rods and pistons, that's probably the first thing that's going to fail when you start to be pushing good power out of this thing. You know what, just before I take the crankshaft out, if you ever get told that you need a rear main and your car's leaking, this is the rear main. So this is an oil seal that's on the back of the engine. It sits around the crankshaft and goes into the actual engine block itself and stops the oil from getting from the inside to the outside. So doing a rear main seal, if your engine's in this condition, it's pretty easy. You just grab one and slap a new one on and job done. If it's getting done in your car, slightly more painful. But anyway, that's what a rear main seal is. Now that we've got the crankshaft out, have a look in the block. there's not too much going on. The castings are absolutely beautiful. So for other engines where you'd spend a whole bunch of time grinding to make everything smooth, to get all your nice oil returns and stuff, not the case. You look inside, it's neat, it's clean, it's got oil squirters on the bottom of the pistons. Just looks functional and just works. It's, as a performance enthusiast, this is kind of what you would expect an engine to look like inside. Coming over to the crankshaft, again, not much you can say. The thing's a beast. They don't have problems. They don't break. They don't break at cylinder number 4, so that you end up with, you know, the crankshaft spinning independent of the flywheel. It's got a great oiling system that's not dependent on the nose of the crankshaft, so it doesn't put a huge amount of load on the front. Even on this thing, you can see very little balancing marks. 10 out of 10, guys. This thing is, I didn't expect to enjoy pulling this engine apart as much as I did. And every time I pulled a new part out of it, I thought, oh, wow, makes sense to do it like that. And I can completely understand why this thing has got the reputation that it has. Absolutely beautiful engine. Well, guys, that's as far as we can go today. We've stripped the thing down to absolutely nothing. There wasn't many bad surprises in it. For me, only good surprises. To be honest, pulling this thing down today has actually sort of inspired me a little bit, and I personally would love to do something with a K-series engine in maybe one of our next builds or something like that. So I'll try and wheel and deal with the the powers that be to see if we can put a K-series in something, maybe turbocharge it and see if we can find the limits ourselves. So now we've stripped an LS, we've stripped a K24. If you guys have got an engine that you want to see me pull apart and put into a box at the end of the day, leave it in the comments. If you'll get a popular one, I'll find the engine, I'll strip it down and you can see what's inside. As always, thanks very much for watching and sticking to the end. My name's Scott, and I'll catch you next time.